Hi, Laura. Again.
Hi, Laura.
Hello, good morning. Yay, success.
Yay.
I think Zoom had to
Finally.
update itself, and then I think we're good.
Mhm. That are Windows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
restarted Windows and then said Zoom was installing updates, and I'm like, okay, I guess maybe it's that. I don't know.
Really.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Laura, for jumping on today. We really appreciate and we thank you for coming online to talk with us. Uh,
Absolutely, thank you.
yeah. So we have Amit with us. Amit is our partner in accessibility testing, and Amit is basically the QA manager at the West Virginia University. So he heads the entire QA department. Um, for a staff of 20,000. So he's a big guy. and
Nice to meet you.
I met me before, and so shall we begin?
Absolutely,
All
yeah.
right, shall we? So thank you, Laura, once again, and thank you, Amit, for coming in. And today we're going to talk about accessibility testing in our podcast, Accessibility Voice. Laura. Laura is a DS tester and an accessibility specialist with a decade's experience in making inclusive education, making education inclusive. She has moved or grown in career and experience from being a teacher at a KTVL Institute along and championing digital accessibility, through her programming skills. So she has grown from teaching and learning, doing physical accessibility to digital. So she has seen the entire journey, upfront. Her advocacy and commitment to accessibility is something that intrigued us, and that's where we reached out to Laura that if she would be, keen on giving us a quick talk about accessibility, and that's where we are. Thank you so much, Laura. Dhara has a set of questions to ask, and she'll hear from you.
Thank you, Younus. And hi, Laura.
Hello.
I just want you to be at ease and feel comfortable, and we can begin. Okay.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. Laura, tell us about your professional journey and experiences in the field of accessibility testing.
Absolutely. My name is Laura Gould, and I am my background has historically been in education. I've been a teacher for 10 years, 8 of those in special education, so working extensively with learners with disabilities. Um, and in being a teacher, and specifically a special education teacher, I've really seen the impact of inaccessible curriculum on my students. And some of the really big things that have come up have been things like things being worded at levels that are really like too cognitively complex, or having things that are not screen reader accessible. So, for example, images as text is something I've seen a lot of in digital curriculum for sure. Um, Things that are relying too much on text, not necessarily having um, information presented in multiple ways. That's something that I've definitely seen a lot of in curriculum as well. Um, and seeing the impact of this really like inaccessible curriculum on my students, it got me to looking more into the field of digital accessibility. I'm trying to remember where exactly I came across it. It might have been on LinkedIn, to be honest. Um, but I started taking some small courses. So I took an edX course called Introduction to Web Accessibility, that I found to be really, really helpful, just in like kind of framing what the field is and what it encompasses. And I was like, oh, there's actually a lot of overlap between what I'm doing as a special education teacher, which is making um, changing and adapting curriculum so that it meets the needs of my students, um, and digital accessibility, which is doing something very similar but in more of a digital environment. Um, got a lot out of that class, found it to be really helpful. And I took a Coursera series as well called Introduction to Accessibility and Inclusive Design, and that got a bit more into the details of things. I remember as part of that, I had to do like a a mock like Microsoft Word remediation, a mock like PowerPoint remediation, and found that to be really interesting, really helpful. And I was like, I definitely want to learn more. And from there, enrolled in the DHS Trusted Tester program. And that got much more into the technical side of things, testing sample websites, kind of learning all about all of the Section 508 standards, implementing those, and basically doing a sample remediation for websites that were not accessible in a lot of different ways. And I found about so many ways that they can be not accessible, and recognized so many of those as things that like either my students found as barriers, or just like in regular everyday life being like, oh, okay, the color contrast on that is really bad. And so now I'm noticing it kind of everywhere I go on the internet. And I also took so I got the DHS Trusted Tester certification, passed the test in July of this year, so still very new. And I also did a CPAC certification preparation course through DEC University. Found that to be super helpful. I'm in the process of studying for my CPAC exam as well. And I recently began my first job as an accessibility tester with a company that's testing e-learning and training materials. It's very new, just started this month, but also just want to make it super clear that I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not my employer.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Laura. Very good to know your perspective on the importance of digital accessibility. Can you also share with us how everyone can contribute to make it more inclusive?
Absolutely. I think the first step to that is really awareness, or just being knowledgeable about digital accessibility as a field, because I found that it's something that the general public doesn't know a whole lot about, or in kind of like going on this journey myself, which I'm still pretty new to, kind of it's very easy to explain to somebody like, oh, I'm a teacher. People know what that is. But explaining like, oh, I work in digital accessibility, people are like, I have never heard of that before. And so I think there are pockets where it's well known about, and there are also places where like it's very much not. And I taught coding classes for 3 years to students in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and like accessibility was not something that came up like at all in teaching that. And granted, this was from teaching more of like the basics, but I think accessibility is often seen as kind of like an add-on versus like a core part of the process from the beginning. And so I think just being knowledgeable about it is the first step, because I think once you understand like what it is, there's not a lot to disagree with. It's like, okay, we want to make sure that like websites and digital experiences and documents and everything are accessible for everybody, and kind of centering the experiences of users with disabilities, and oftentimes making things accessible for disabled users is going to make it more accessible to everyone. And so once people kind of hear and understand that, then they're like, oh, okay, yes, that makes a lot of sense. But I think the first step is getting there. In terms of how everybody can contribute, I think there's a lot of ways to do that. And as I get more into the field of accessibility, I realize just how deep it goes. And you very much have individuals on like the technical side of things who are very good at kind of making those changes or designing with accessibility in mind from the very beginning to make sure that whatever product or whatever app or whatever is accessible. And I think you've also got people who are more on the advocacy side of things, who are kind of spreading the word about like what accessibility is, why it's important, why ways that like might have been used in the past or common ways of remediation are actually not especially accessible. Sometimes you get like common fixes that are like actually not that actually like make things worse as opposed to making things better. And so I think people who are really out there like championing for accessibility like are doing really excellent work. And I imagine you have people who do a mix of both, who are doing kind of more of the advocacy work as well as more as some of the technical side of things. And I think there's very much room for both. I know you also get people who are kind of more on the like making how do I phrase it? Like universities will have roles like this where it's like they might not be actually doing the physical accessibility work, but they're ensuring that all of the accommodations that need to be met are being met, kind of doing more of almost like the organizational piece, which is also super important. So I think the more that we can kind of get people on board to know what it is, and spread the word to people, and also making sure that everything that's being done is in line with standards and actually usable by users with disabilities. I think that there's a lot of really exciting things happening there, and also a lot of room to grow.
Absolutely. Yes. I think awareness is the first step, and if at all levels, right from if you're looking at digital, right from the requirement phase until the delivery, all the phases needs to be aware of what accessibility and how accessibility impacts the ROI. So even if you look at from a marketing point of view, I have seen websites and web applications, especially e-commerce, they benefit a lot if the website is or the app is accessible.
Absolutely.
I have seen approximately 15 to 20% increase in revenues given you make your app accessible. So yeah, that is Absolutely. True. Awareness is the first step, and I don't know why it is hidden under so many layers, and it is not that it's not really that difficult to make applications accessible. So yeah, that is insightful. And I think from your physical accessibility experience, like while you were a teacher, I think for special kids, could you give us a little more on that? How did you contribute, and what do you think made not only the educational content, but the entire experience of a special needs kid in a school more accessible?
Absolutely. So I think the first step is really knowing who your students are and what their needs are. And that's going to be different depending on which students you end up with. And so I would end up with a lot of students who had like learning disabilities, ADHD, students who are autistic, sometimes students with like neurological disabilities, that sort of thing. And so what we'd be given is a document called an individualized education program. And so with that, and also creating that throughout the year. And so there's accommodations in there that we have to follow. And so making sure that we're implementing that into our curriculum, what I would be doing is creating like specialized instruction for those students. And so to make sure that they were able to access it, it might be something as simple as like breaking things down into smaller chunks, making sure that directions are really, really clear. For students who are dyslexic, like they might have a really hard time reading print. And so something that, aside from just like giving them like print materials that are at their particular level, if it's like, okay, we want them to be able to read something that's more complex or understand something that's more complex, like making sure that it's able to be read out loud, either by a human reader and they're listening to a recording, or by a screen reader. And that's where I think I came into a lot of difficulty. And so like some of that was like, I think remediating for that is harder, but like finding things that are already accessible just like makes that so much easier. And so yeah, I think a lot of it was like finding accessible curriculum versus like trying to take things that were already inaccessible and making them more accessible, because that's if you're designing things with accessibility in mind, that very much benefits you later on, as opposed to trying to kind of squeeze that in at the end. Then you're making a whole lot more work for yourself. I'd say for mathematics instruction, making sure that students had access to manipulatives like repeated practice, instructions that were really clear and succinct, Access to visuals were a really big one, as well as, let's see. And I'd say, well, like what works for like the students that I've worked with would not necessarily work for every single student or every single student with a disability. I worked with a student who had a very different set of needs, who had like both visual and hearing impairments. She was also very, very young. And so like if I gave her a video with captions, that wouldn't work because she couldn't read yet. She was getting there, but she was really little. But making sure that things were really engaging with like pictures and sounds, and like things were really magnified for her was really important. Whereas that was something that like wasn't as much of a factor for some of the other students I worked with. Making sure that things, we had access to things that were like more tactile. And so the needs are really going to depend on who your users are, or who my students were. But I think a big thing that you can do is, and this is a really key kind of concept in education as well, is design for universal design for learning. And so things that are accessible for students with disabilities are often going to be usable for everybody. And so I'd find that, especially when I was working in more of like a co-teaching context, so working alongside general education teachers, I'd be creating or kind of modifying things so that it would meet the needs of my students with disabilities. But like other students who might not have like been diagnosed with disability were like, oh, that makes so much more sense. Like we should just explain it like that all the time. Or when I'd make modifications for my students, things like, okay, we're going to add, audio recordings, or we're going to be making sure that, things are accompanied by visuals, or like things like that. Like everybody was using those accommodations. A really common one actually that I just implemented for everybody because it was helpful was as opposed to, I would always give students the option of, okay, you can write your paragraph or your paper or whatever by typing it out, but if you want to voice type it, like that's totally fine. And that's something that a lot of students would use, whether or not that necessarily, they could have a disability.
Follows the format, yeah.
Right. But yeah, just giving, I think, options and creating different ways of accessing, it could be curriculum, it could be digital content, and giving, and making sure that things are formatted in such a way that people can customize it to what works for them, I think is really important. And I think there's a lot of overlap there between curriculum as well as digital experiences, and with digital curriculum, oftentimes both.
So Laura, tell us one more thing here. If you have to address those kind of issues, how do you collaborate with your designers and developers, and at what stage you recommend that this changes should be implemented?
Absolutely. I haven't done I've done sort of accessibility remediation in a sense, more with collaborating with teachers than I have with designers and developers, but I think the same principles are probably going to apply. I think it takes people being aware of it at the very beginning stages. I think people being committed to it and being on board with it, and being like, yes, this is really important and we need to put this at the center. And then designing with accessibility in mind, or as a key facet of the process. I think if you're starting out and you're like, okay, I want to make sure that this is going to be accessible for people who, I mean, for everybody really, but and going within those Section 508 or WCAG standards, or both, I think making sure that things are meeting standards from the very beginning and are usable by a wide range of technology, like assistive technologies or ways of using things, is really, really important. And I found that to be true when collaborating with teachers. If they're on board from the very beginning, then like creating things was a lot more streamlined, because it's like, okay, now we have a system, we have a way of doing things that's going to work for everybody. And now that we're working within that system, then we can create things that are accessible and and that being fairly easy to use. I found that in education, it's much more cumbersome if you're like, okay, here's this curriculum that I've been using for, 20 years. Here's all these scanned images of PDFs or whatever. Or like, here's the way we've always been doing it now, like make it accessible. And it's like, okay, this is a lot of work. And
Yes.
the end result often ends up being something that is not as good as if you had designed with that in mind from the beginning. I think in education, there's a lot of really exciting, there's been such a shift to digital content in the past. I mean, especially from COVID, but I think even before. And I think that opens up a lot of really awesome opportunities to be able to adapt content to such a wide range of needs, and to be able to for students to be able to access things in ways that they haven't previously. Even like a lot of the standardized tests and things like that have moved to being digital, and now it's like, oh, everybody can just have it. Everybody, or if they've got the accommodation enabled, can have it like read out loud to them as they read, like as they go through the test. Like that's awesome. Or they can highlight things, they can change the color contrast, and that's just, and a lot of those are just universal tools that everybody can use. And I think being like implementing those as just kind of like universal accommodations is something that would not have existed on that scale probably 10 to 15 years ago, but it's just like now more of a normal thing, which is great. So I think if you're designing with that in mind, you're going to come out with a much better result than if you're trying to kind of take something that was originally not very accessible and then kind of like mold it into being more accessible.
Trying to fitting in is not the case.
And sometimes those suggestions don't need to be really big, but smaller suggestions like color contrast, button, text, images can definitely improve the experience. Do you recollect any instance where your suggestion definitely made an impact in elevating user experience? And in your case, users are students, so that is even more important for them to make things easier.
For sure. I found so in my current role, so I can speak to that, and I can speak to education as well. I've been in my current role for about a week now, so not super long. But in working through, say, like PDFs, for example, which I know are often challenging to make accessible or have kind of their own set of rules. Some things that I've commonly seen are like not having any alt text. So like somebody with a screen reader that like it'll just say like image, like it doesn't actually make any sense. Or like headings being coded incorrectly, or like or lists, or like videos not having captions and that kinds of things. And so those often feel like on the more basic end of things, but like those are things that very much impact usability, and like being like, hey, you need to remediate these. Those are things that are immediately going to have an impact for sure. In terms of in education, I definitely found that implementing accessibility changes had very real impacts on my students. So things as simple as like, okay, we're going to read an article and also have like a digital like read aloud associated with it. And there are some websites that do really good work with this. Like ReadWorks is one that I really like. Newsella is another one, where it's like, okay, sometimes it'll be like a speech to text read aloud. Sometimes it'll be a human, depending on the article. But just having that way to like hear it out loud while also like reading it like visually, like super, super important, and like immediately made it so much more helpful for my students. I often did human reader kind of stuff as well, but like that is not there's only so much that I can read things 100 times in a row. If a student needed to hear something 100 times in a row, then they could just like autonomously do that themselves if they have access to that. I had students who dyslexic students who got access to a tool called Google Read and Write, which is not necessarily quite the same in terms of like a screen reader like NVDA or JAWS or something like that, because it wasn't students with visual impairments, but students, usually dyslexic students, where they could look at text. They could have it read out loud to them. They could highlight things. They can look up things in a dictionary, like in a visual dictionary, to see like, what does this word mean? Things like word prediction software, I had some students with access to, and like that made it so much easier for them to be able to write and to share their ideas. Kind of like I mentioned before, like access to like dictation software, which is like now just implemented into like Google Docs and Microsoft Word and things like that, is something that when I first started teaching was very much like this is a specialty software that now you have to get kind of like added on, and is now just like integrated into everything. And I found that it creates so much access for students to be able to use tools like that. And so I think where some of the challenges come in education is just like making sure a lot of these tools are out there, but making sure that both students have access to them and know about them and know how to use them is, I think, a really big piece of it. So I think a lot of what my role as a teacher has been is not necessarily like creating those accessible experiences, but like making sure that students have access to them and know how to use them, because it's out there and it exists and it's often really, really good. And I think empowering students to know how to use those tools and to be able to use them consistently and just like normalizing it, as opposed to being like, okay, this is the way education has been done for, hundreds of years. Like, you have to do it this way, to make it really normal that, like, you know what, like, here's the assignment, but we're going to all be doing it in different ways. Like, whether that's your voice typing it, whether that's you're typing it, whether that's, we had some students who it was a little bit easier for us to scribe for them. And so, they'd say it out loud, we'd type it for them, just like giving options, and then normalizing, like, whatever option you choose, that's great. Like, we'll get it done in whatever way works for you. And I think that's both really helpful for students to kind of eliminate those barriers, but also creates, I think, so much ownership in students to be able to be like, hey, like, I know what I need to be able to be successful in school. And I think the more that you normalize that, and you normalize being able to use, assistive technology or just different ways of accessing things, the more that you both eliminate those barriers and also open things up to everybody being like, okay, like, I don't necessarily have to do everything in the same exact way.
Yes, and it is very helpful to get a direct feedback from them when especially you have made some accessibility improvements and want to know whether it is working in the right direction or not.
Absolutely. And students are going to be the first people to give you feedback. If it's like,
right,
this is not working, then you will know. They'll be like, I can't read this, or they'll be like, I don't get this at all. And so you get kind of that instantaneous feedback when you're working with students, which is really, really great. And you get to kind of pivot and be flexible on the fly and be like, okay, this thing isn't working, but like, let's try something new. I think in digital accessibility, the feedback loop might take a little bit longer.
And Laura, when we are talking about content, and especially when it is educational content, have you ever seen the situation where it is in a multiple language, let's say, and your improvements are working on one language, but not on other?
Oh gosh.
Is that something that you've experienced?
Not a lot. I think maybe that would come up more if I was, I feel like as a foreign language teacher, may see that quite a bit more of that, because then you're switching between multiple languages in your content, but not as much. I know in like the trusted tester program, you'd get, you have to make sure that the thing that's not in English is coded in a different way to make sure your screen reader will read it in the other language. But that's something I haven't seen so much yet. That's something that could be really interesting and really really exciting, and probably like complex to deal with, and something that I'd love to kind of work with in the future, but not something I've seen much of yet.
So is the grading for students with special, for special education, the grading is different, or is it similar to the?
Depends. So The thing about like individualized education programs is that it's really individualized based on the student. So based on the student's needs, you might have some students who kind of go through the traditional grading system. They might just need some accommodations. You have what's called every individualized education program has goals that students have to meet or have to make progress on. And so you do reporting on their progress towards those goals. And so their grading might be tied to that. And sometimes it might be a mix of like traditional grading and like their IEP goals, something like that. It really depends.
Okay. And how do teachers prepare for it? So I'm just sitting out, it feels all okay, but then when I hear from you, I really understand the kind of challenge that you might be facing on a day-to-day basis. So kudos to that. That's something that is commendable. And a big shout out to every teacher who is going through this and doing it day in, day out. I think that is a big job that is being done and making the world a very, very, very good place, for all these beautiful kids who have special abilities and special needs. So yeah, thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
With the current scenario of things where you are actually testing material, do you guys automate most of it, or you have manual procedures in which you do it, or you are still exploring it? How is it like?
I'm still exploring processes. I think most of what we've been doing recently has been manual testing. And so going through checklists for like the Section 508 and WCAG standards, making sure it meets each one. There are tools that we'll use. I think the simplest but also like most powerful one, I would say, is like using the keyboard and making sure things are keyboard accessible, because that can cover a lot of things. We'll use some automated checkers for like color contrast and things like that, but it's still really helpful to also manually test text against its backgrounds and things like that, because if you like just have it scan the whole page, it might not pick up on everything. We do use Axe Dev tools. I'm still kind of new to that, and making my way through that. And we also use Andy for more of the like programmatic stuff. So I'd say it's a mix of both, but I feel like more of where my efforts lie are within the scope of manual testing, I would say. Not to say that automated testing is not helpful, because it very much is, and I think I'm still trying to learn some more of those tools to be able to use them more effectively. But I also know that automated testing is not going to catch everything that you're looking for. And if you rely solely on automated testing, you're going to be missing out on a whole scope of accessibility issues for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the foundation of it, because at the end of the day, it's not a machine who's going to use it; it's a human who's going to use it. So, yeah. So if a machine would have been using it, so definitely automation is the way. But yeah, humans have different ways to perceive, and humans have different eyes to see things, or different senses. Yeah, to see things. Yeah. So yeah, that's great, and I think it's a long journey to go ahead. Have you worked on UI UX as well? Because I think
not a lot. I know that a lot of people who come into accessibility work like will often come from a UI UX background, because there is very much a lot of overlap. I'd say that that's an area that I could stand to learn more about and grow in. I don't have a lot of background in that, but I have had like conversations with friends who work in that, and I'm like, oh, like, okay, what you're doing is like just good design a lot of the time. And so I think that there is for sure some overlap, but not necessarily things that I have a lot of formal background in.
Got it. That's amazing.
Yes, Laura, and I'm assuming that since education content is just not website restricted, you must be performing your testing across different devices also, like mobile apps or web responsiveness.
Yeah, I would say in my current role, and again, very new, most of what I've been doing is like PDFs and webinars and things like that. I think in like more of the educational like K through 12 curriculum stuff that I've worked with previously, that is more I think that I've seen things go through more like accessibility checks than like just regular like teacher created content. And
Mm.
so if you're getting something from more of like an official app or website, like oftentimes it's kind of gone through that process. But if you've got just like teachers sharing curriculum or like something that's been kind of like part of a school for a really long time or something like that, you don't necessarily have the same kind of accessibility checks going on, which makes sense because it's not something that I think a lot of people, especially in education, but kind of across the board, will know about. If what you have is somebody who's like, I'm really good at creating reading curriculum, like that's awesome. But that, unless you know about it or have a reason to be testing for it, like you're not necessarily going to know about accessibility. And so I think because curriculum is so kind of individualized, like across, across schools or across classes or teachers or that kind of thing, you get kind of these inconsistencies where some things might be really accessible,
Mm-hmm.
and you get things, other things that are very much not. I know like in college and grad school, you get all of these like scholarly articles, things you need to read, and it's like, cool, here's this image of a PDF that's like 50 pages long or something like that. And something like that is super, super inaccessible because it's like, this is an image and it is not text. And even if you like try to convert it to text, it does not make any sense. And so I think there are places where accessibility is very much being implemented. And you have places where it's very much not. And so it's really inconsistent.
How do you stay updated on current standards and guidelines?
Yeah, Tech University has a lot of really good webinars, and so I'll go to those. And I know they're really often pioneering and staying very much on top of advances in the accessibility field. So I'll go to those. I know you're getting some. They're not implemented yet, but we'll be getting some new like WCAG standards, like 2.2 that'll be coming out. And so I've been kind of keeping on top of articles talking about that. I'll also, especially because I'm new to the field, I feel like staying on top of things is also just like learning is also very much a part of that, and kind of getting more into the field. So I would say, like going to webinars, taking like online classes, things like that. WebAIM has a lot of really good resources, so there's classes through there that I've worked on. I'd say just like working my way through like various webinars, and there's also a lot of really good content creators. I'd say especially on LinkedIn, I see a lot of them that are very much on top of like the newest advancements, like how things are kind of shifting. People who have been in the accessibility field for a long time, so have that kind of scope of knowledge from like where is it been to where is it evolving. And so I find from following and reading and interacting with people who are a lot more knowledgeable than myself, they have a lot of really good resources and a lot of really good expertise as well.
Absolutely.
Just curious to know, do you see the difference between the browser, like different experiences as well?
Sorry, but in browsers?
Yeah, different browsers.
Oh gosh. Most of the time I'm using Google Chrome, I would say 99% of the time. And so that would be the one that I'm certainly the most familiar with. I feel like that's the one that I spend the most time in. I have a Windows laptop, and so sometimes I'll accidentally end up in Microsoft Edge or something like that. And every time I'm like, this feels disorienting. I know that across browsers, like there have been a lot of kind of moves been made towards accessibility in the past, like even 5 to 10 years. Like it's been there are things that are a lot more accessible than they used to be. I can't say I'm super well versed on differences between browsers per se, but I will say that like when I often find myself in a digital scenario that I'm not often in, that I'm often kind of like impressed at like, oh, like this was not like this like 5 years ago. Like I recently got a new like MacBook computer as well. And like it immediately starts up and like the first thing it goes to in your setup is like set all your accessibility features. And like I had
Absolutely.
a previous one in like 2012 or something like that. And so I haven't like been using a Mac for a while. But I was like, oh, I definitely do not remember that being part of the process there. But now it's just like this is the first thing when you're setting up your computer, which is really cool.
Yeah, Apple really does a good job at making things accessible. Yeah, I can vouch for that. Yeah.
Laura, let's say if any organization who is pretty new in this area and trying to incorporate inclusivity and trying to elevate their digital experience and trying to build a roadmap with the team, what would be your suggestion how and when and where they can start?
That's a really good question. I admit I've not been on something from more of an architectural standpoint, but I would say making sure that accessibility is at the forefront of everything you're doing is really important. And I think you'll find that like if you're focusing on accessibility, not just like from a compliance standpoint, but just a how can everyone use this kind of standpoint, that you're going to be, it's often going to be a better design that's going to benefit more people. And then generally, especially if you're dealing with like e-commerce or like apps or something like that, it's going to have like positive business impacts as well. So I'd say, first of all, just making sure everybody's like aware of what accessibility is and the impact of it, why it's important, and like truly invested in it, not just like, okay, now we need to check a box. I think that that's really important. I would say designing with that in mind, and you might be creating like a little bit more of a deliberate roadmap for yourself in the beginning, but I think probably saving yourself a whole lot of time and hassle later on.
Yeah.
I think having people who are experienced and knowledgeable in the digital accessibility field as part of your planning and not just in the planning, but in implementation and testing and kind of throughout the whole life cycle of the product, I think is really important. And I'd say not just people who are experienced in digital accessibility, but also like users with disabilities. And so if you are like, and making that testing part a really regular and consistent part of the process. And so you can be like, okay, yep, I coded this for, screen readers or keyboard users, whatever. This is all great. We're compliant now. Yeah. And then you get people who actually navigate the web or apps in those ways, who use it, and they're like, no, this is not accessible. Then like something has definitely gone wrong. And so I'd say making sure you've got users who use things in a wide variety of ways, as both in the planning stages as well as in the testing and implementation stages, and kind of throughout the entire process. I think that's really helpful. I think the more feedback you can get, the better, and the more you're open to soliciting that feedback and implementing that feedback, the better product you're going to have.
And then checking time to time whether it is working in the right direction or not.
For sure. Especially as like updates roll out, or like things are changing or adapting, you want to make sure that they're continuing to be accessible and to be used by a wide range of people.
Absolutely. Wow, that sounded like an architect.
I am not formally one. I'd say that there's probably some overlaps between unit planning and teaching and architecting an entire app or system or something like that. The details of which are things that I don't have formal experience in, but I think if you're planning with accessibility in mind, then you're
generally put it forth. Yeah, I think
have better results.
If you generally put it forth, if you think of your users first, who's going to consume your apps, consume your website, that's the first step, and I think you were bang on. Thank you so much for that.
And I think, Laura, in a very short time, you have gained a fantastic knowledge, and it's amazing. And thanks for sharing that with us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions? I've been bombarding you with questions. Do you have anything to ask us?
Sure. I would say, what are some of the major, advancements that you've seen in the accessibility field in, let's say, the past like 5 years? What would you say have been some of the major shifts you've seen?
See, the biggest shift that I've seen is the mindset of people who now, so the UX designers that I'm meeting are talking accessibility, not all of them, but many of them, as compared to 5 years ago, where it was driven by, a compliance need, or even driven by the government pushing the products or the webs, So yesterday only I spoke to a doctor, you won't believe it. So she came to me and she said, "Hey, Younus, I want to get my website accessible." I'm like, wow, this is superb. Why would you say that? So she came in from her own experience of using her own website because she had a visual disability, and then she said, "This is too difficult for me." I'm like, yeah, we need to get this thing done. So that is one, that there is realization that these things can be done. So the inclusion of people with disabilities is now becoming an awareness. So the awareness is in, people know that this is possible. So that makes things more easier, because nobody will say no, that okay, we will not make our website accessible. That's but then the awareness is the first step. So that the awareness is increasing in the last 5 years. Second is, there's a lot of tools that are coming, good tools as well, which are off the shelf, and they make your experience a little better. Maybe voiceovers are coming in, better voiceovers, better accents, for that matter. Even in the voiceover, you can choose you want to male accent, female accent, so that way it makes more accessible, small things like that. Moving out of the US and moving in European as the Asian countries, so the penetration of accessibility is less, but then the awareness has also come in over there. So that's what I'm seeing, while I work with clients globally, from Australia, from Asia. So I think that, yeah, these are the few major changes that have come in. Browsers, and just like how we discussed about Apple, making products more and more accessible each passing day. So companies have, so Apple is like, everyone will just blindly copy what they do. So if Apple is in the right direction, people will definitely follow. So that is a good thing, and Apple has been at the forefront of accessibility. So yeah, definitely. And laws are getting stricter, where the government is pushing, and there are two things about the laws. One is that the government is giving you budget, and tax rebates on accessibility, which is a great thing, which I don't think was there earlier. And now, strict laws means, getting things done faster, so companies are implementing this. So I'm happy about the implementation rate. I'm happy about the tools that are coming in, and I'm happy about the acceptance by teams, So back in the day, I had never seen in a roadmap for a product anywhere a mention of accessibility. Now we see it in each sprint. Now we see it in each new interface. So that's progress, I think. Yeah.
Yes,
Absolutely.
and organizations are getting more and more open about it.
Yeah.
People talk about it, and I think so that makes a difference. And when especially it comes from the upper management, it's easier to follow by everyone in the organization, and things are happening, in a positive direction, I would say.
And I second that, because I'm in 22 years in QA and quality assurance, and I didn't had any time doing this kind of test but year before, and recently I'm coming across these things, and I'm glad to meet Dhara and Younus and getting to know a lot more on it. And today I learned to get to know more from Laura, so thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I very much have a lot to learn from all of you as well. I feel like I'm very new to digital accessibility, not so new to like universal design for learning, but like just in terms of how to implement this in the technological space. There are so many avenues, and there's just so much possibility. And so I think it's something that's really cool and really exciting.
A lot of you would really appreciate if you just keep sharing any blogs which are
Yeah, you did that. Thank you so much for that. And if you have anything
Absolutely.
which is something that you feel, we can definitely publish it on our blog, and maybe we can learn from it. Yeah, primarily.
Sounds great. Thank you.
and any expert that you follow, and we can also gain some knowledge from there. Any LinkedIn page
Do
or
you have any ideas
any
where we could,
website.
Perfect. Yeah, happy
if you
to.
have any ideas where we can reach out to groups or people and maybe share some knowledge about this, feel free, and we can set up a webinar, or we can set up something where we can educate people and advocate about accessibility, digital or physical, for that matter.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, happy to share things. I'm trying to post on LinkedIn a little bit more. Would definitely not call myself an expert, but very much somebody who is excited to learn and grow and make the world hopefully a more accessible place for people.
Laura, you definitely have stories to tell, and especially in the field of education, people would love to know more and more about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
would you be open to an idea, Laura, to so because you're in education, would you be open to an idea of doing a small webinar where you could make a presentation of sorts? And
Yeah, that's something
yeah,
that
some
yeah,
good
let me know what you're
tips.
thinking.
These are
But
the
yeah,
10 things that you should do. Yeah, would that be something that you would be open to? Take your time, maybe a week,
yes.
whatever works for you.
I have to think about who I'm directing it as or directing it to. Like, because the issues are not necessarily with like individual teachers or even individual schools. It's so much like a systemic
Yeah.
thing. So I'd have to think about how I want to frame it, but that's something I'd be open to. Yeah.
Lovely. So maybe we'll get back to you over email, ask you and trouble you for your time, and then you can tell us whenever whenever you're available, and then we can do a quick webinar and
Cool.
speak
Sounds
about
great.
a
Thank you.
specific topic. Maybe we can do one in the next month. That's September. So
Yeah.
we pick up a topic of your choice, which you're comfortable with, and maybe show techniques or show some tricks which can help people think in the right direction. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'd definitely be open to that. Thank you.
All right. Cool. That's all from our end. Thank you so much once again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really great to get
Have
to
a
chat with
lovely
you.
week ahead.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Laura.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
See you guys later.
See
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. And thank you for having me as well.
Hey, Amit, wait, you wait. I'll stop recording.
You want me to stop or?